Okay, where's the party? It says 310 Spring Street at the Anchor Bar.
So you're here for the Kurt Cobain film?
Yes, I am.
How'd you hear about it?
I saw it on MySpace, actually.
Have you seen any other documentaries?
Nothing really spectacular, no.
What are your expectations for the film?
I'm curious. The layout with the voiceover on like stock footage seems interesting. I think it'll either be really good or really boring.
I'll just tell you one little thing about the film. A few years ago, my nephew was turning 13 and was getting into Nirvana and started asking me questions about Kurt. And I could tell that by what he was asking, like so much of his perception of who this man was completely colored by the controversies and the baggage of the end of Kurt's life. The drug use and suicide and controversial wife and conspiracy theories. And it was funny to think about it, but I realized that when we first started listening to Nirvana that none of those things were present. And it was this guy who was a completely unlikely person to achieve the level of fame that he did, a man from a small logging town in the Pacific Northwest. And I thought that the greatest gift I could give to Justin, my nephew, was to try to strip away the baggage and the iconography from Kurt and return to a place where maybe we could connect with a very interesting, very thoughtful, perceptive young man. And that is the person I hope to reintroduce you to tonight. Let's bring up the lights and get some questions. I mean, I guess for me growing up, Kurt was a year older than I am, and he was really the first person of my generation to talk about the issues that had affected a lot of people my age. I mean, he talked about divorce and how that had become more prevalent. He talked about you know, violence against women and gay rights and things that had changed in small towns. And there was an essence of his desire to, I mean, he would always reject sort of this notion of being a generational spokesperson, but at the same time never turn down an opportunity to talk about what had happened in the 70s and 80s. And so to me, it's about someone who, although he had very specific experiences to his own life, is about a child of a very specific time in American history and a very specific place in American history. And while there are certainly familial elements that run throughout the film, both him as the child of two parents and also as the father of a child as well, it really is about being a son of Aberdeen, a son of Washington, and a son of America at a very specific time. Courtney doesn't have anything to do with the film, but I was very, you know, when Michael and I first talked about the project, you know, Michael was close to both Kurt and Courtney, and I said I really wanted Courtney to know from the very beginning that we were doing this project. Michael owned all the rights to the interviews, and so we've kept her completely informed as we went along, and the decision ultimately not to use a Nirvana song was mine. I tried to put a Nirvana song at the end when you see Kurt's face. I had probably edited photographs of Kurt to half of Nirvana's catalog. And it was really completely the wrong mood for the end of the film. There was a sense of it being almost triumphant, or asking a certain song to carry the weight of the end of the film, which to me is all about what it is to suffer from depression, what it is to say goodbye to someone, what it is to reflect on one's life. And there was no one track that could really do that. And then I tried this piece of score music that Steve Fisk and Ben Gibbard wrote, and I thought it was lonely and mournful and had all the qualities that I wanted. And I said to my producers, "You're going to think I'm crazy, but I don't think there should be a Nirvana song in the movie." And there's not.
But, you know, also, one great way to introduce yourself to somebody is to make them a mixtape. And the soundtrack is basically a Kurt mixtape. It's stuff that he would have put on a collection of music that he would have made for someone he wanted to get to know better. So it's a way of getting to know Kurt better, just like hearing him talk for an hour and a half is, or seeing the places where he lived. It's just another ingredient that kind of stacks up to getting into where his heart and mind are. The idea behind the original book that these interviews were conducted for was so he could clear the air. And because there was so much going on around that time, you might recall that there was a Vanity Fair story written about Kurt and Courtney, which was used partly as evidence for taking custody of his child away from him. And the idea was to tell as straight a story as possible, and Kurt entrusted me to do that. And in the ensuing years, people's conception of Kurt has been so colored by his tragic, turbulent past few months that it seemed like it was time to use this same material to clear the air yet once again. And you know, this film is not it's not a moneymaker. Kurt's not in it. There's no Nirvana music in it. This is not a commercial enterprise. It's an independent film, and I assure you, no one is getting rich off this. The gentleman in the front row was asking whether Kurt was really that funny, basically, and whether we had cut it, you know, the dialogue together to make it seem like he was a funny guy, or you know, more upbeat than perhaps we perceive him to be. But that was the whole idea of the movie, is that he really was like that. This is as close to how I remember him as I can possibly imagine. Again, people remember him in those last few months of this really turbulent, you know, scenes of domestic violence, horrible drug addiction, you know, a suicide attempt, and then another successful one. But he actually was a really cool guy, and you just saw what a cool guy he was. And he was a very complex guy. And he wasn't this iconic Kurt Cobain. He was actually a dude that you could hang out with and have a great conversation with. And it was effortless. I mean, we could have taken any hour and a half, almost, I think, out of those 25 hours and gotten the same result. It's just that some things just seem to jump out as particularly funny or enlightening, but you would have gotten the same vibe from him as a vibrant person. It's only, you know, I caught him just before I think he really started to slide down, and I'm really fortunate that I happened to catch him at that time, because that's what he was. He lived to be 27 and change, and this is what he was like. What you just saw, this is what he was like for 26 years.
I'll just say, you know, a lot of times I get asked whether what I was most surprised about, or what I you know, learned the most from listening to the tapes, and it was that level of complexity. I never thought of his humor in that way. You know, I find interviews to be this great art form, and listening to 25 hours of Michael's conversations with Kurt, I felt was just like the most stunning experience. Because it was such a complete picture, I thought, of this man, and not only the funny guy, but you know, the guy who was paranoid and delusional, and like, you know, says all the crazy things that addicts say about like being able to kick drugs because I'm rich, so I can do that. I mean, and I just felt really fortunate after listening to it that we had that his character came out in such full colors. I think that was something that was very, very exciting going through the footage, and that he was so perceptive and smart and lucid, which I think people may not have that perception of him.
It's funny. It makes me realize how young and naive I was at the time. I mean, there was a lot of stuff happening around me that I either didn't register or ignored because it was too much for me to handle at the time. I hear myself, you know, relating very heavily to Kurt. I mean, that was we had a lot in common.